Clyde is an engineer who enjoys tinkering with various objects. His daughter has embraced his passion for creating and has crafted a bracelet as a gift for her father, and is now in the process of making another one for her mother. Clyde's wife requests that he open the front door of their home. As he does so, he is suddenly knocked to the ground by the force of two burglars breaking into the house. The intruders proceed to restrain Clyde by tying his hands, before robbing the family's belongings. One of the burglars, named Darby, chillingly states, "You can't fight fate," before stabbing Clyde. Darby's criminal partner, Rupert, attempts to leave the scene but is silenced by a stern command to shut up. Tragically, Clyde is made to bear witness as his wife is sexually assaulted and murdered. When his young daughter arrives on the scene, she too falls victim to the brutal criminals. Nick, a career-driven prosecutor, discusses the tragic case involving Clyde's family with a colleague. The situation took a turn for the worse the previous night when a judge ruled that DNA evidence from the crime scene would not be admissible in court. As a result, Nick opted for a plea deal instead of going to trial, stating that some justice is better than no justice at all. Clyde provides Nick with notes that he believes may aid in the case, but Nick dismisses them. He explains that Darby has agreed to testify against Rupert, which will likely result in Rupert being sentenced to death row, while Darby will face a maximum of 5 years in prison. Struggling to process this news, an emotionally scared Clyde desperately pleads with Nick not to accept the deal, but the decision has already been made. Nick coldly explains that the justice system is not about what one knows, but what one can prove, and he considers this outcome a victory for the prosecution. In the courtroom, Rupert is portrayed as the primary perpetrator of the crimes. Darby mocks Nick's wife in a hushed tone and signs the plea agreement. Afterward, Nick addresses the press about the case, and Darby offers a sarcastic thank you for his support. Nick observes the scene, still reeling from the injustice he has witnessed. Later, Nick returns home to his wife, Kelly, and speaks with his unborn daughter as a means of soothing his frazzled nerves. A decade passes and Nick's daughter has grown up, but his demanding job keeps him as busy as ever. He misses another one of his daughter's school events, much to Kelly's dismay. On the day of Rupert's execution by lethal injection, Nick is present with his co-worker, Sarah, choosing to attend the execution over his daughter's recital. Rupert's final words are a claim that he was not responsible for the deaths of Clyde's family, which leaves both Sarah and Nick unsettled. The execution is anything but painless, as Rupert convulses and screams in agony before dawning. The prison warden insists that they are not at fault for the excruciating death, as nothing like it has occurred before. A police officer delivers a mysterious bottle to the prosecutors, with the phrase, "Can't fight fate," inscribed on it. Recognizing the quote, the police investigate Darby's location. Meanwhile, Darby snorts some flour at his residence before receiving a cryptic phone call from a muffled voice that seems to know everything about him. Growing increasingly paranoid, Darby looks out his window to see police closing in on his position. He makes a run for it, firing shots at the police vehicles in the process. He then receives another call from the muffled voice, instructing him to discard his weapon and head to an abandoned factory if he wishes to avoid imprisonment. On his way to the factory, Darby comes across a police officer asleep in his car. He seizes the opportunity, taking the officer's gun and forcing him to drive to a secluded location. Once there, Darby orders the officer to kneel down. However, before he can execute his captive, Darby receives another phone call, revealing that his mysterious rescuer is none other than Clyde himself. Darby attempts to shoot Clyde, but the gun turns out to be a trap, injecting him with a paralyzing serum instead. Although immobilized, Darby remains fully conscious and can feel pain. Clyde takes Darby to a warehouse he owns and restrains him, vowing to inflict unimaginable suffering on him while prolonging his life as much as possible. Before commencing the torture, Clyde reminds Darby of the helplessness he felt 10 years ago, repeating the phrase, "You can't fight fate." Clyde then begins to dismember Darby, recording the entire process. Nick and Sarah discuss the tampering with the lethal injection procedure, agreeing that Darby lacked the intelligence to orchestrate such a scheme. Later, the police discover Darby's remains, which have been dismembered into 25 pieces. They inform Nick of the grisly scene, and Sarah deduces that the only person with a motive is Clyde. Over the years, Clyde has liquidated all of his assets, purchasing properties in peculiar locations, including the warehouse where Darby's remains were found. The police descend upon Clyde's residence, and he calmly greets them, though completely naked. Clyde is arrested, and as he is escorted to the police car, he shoots Nick a menacing glare. At Clyde's home, investigators uncover books on law and a newspaper clipping featuring Nick and Darby shaking hands. Clyde is detained in an interrogation room, but the police lack concrete evidence against him and can only hope for a confession. Meanwhile, Nick's daughter receives a recording that she believes is of a recital and asks her mother to watch it with her. Her mother declines, suggesting they wait for Nick to join them. The girl secretly plays the DVD, only to discover it contains footage of Clyde dismembering Darby. Nick confronts Clyde, feigning approval of his actions in hopes of eliciting a confession. Clyde obliquely admits to wanting to kill Darby and Rupert, but denies any direct involvement. Nick views this as a confession and tries to leave, but Clyde forces him to stay, revealing his intimate knowledge of Nick's daily routine. Clyde explains that his statements are inadmissible since he never explicitly admitted to committing any crimes, and the lack of evidence means they cannot prove anything. However, Clyde offers to provide a full confession if Nick agrees to grant him a small favor, a bed. Nick's pride gets the better of him, and he adamantly refuses. Nick's supervisor, Jonas, chastises him for refusing the deal. He insists that a confession in exchange for a mattress is a good bargain, especially given the lack of evidence against Clyde. Despite this, Nick remains steadfast in his belief that Clyde is toying with them. Jonas urges him once more to agree to the deal. Clyde eventually receives the mattress he requested, and someone in the prison is already coveting it. The warden expresses his displeasure with Clyde's actions. In court, Nick argues against granting Clyde bail. He points out that Clyde claims to be a law-abiding citizen, yet Nick has no evidence to keep him detained without bail. The judge seems inclined to side with Clyde. Nick retorts that Clyde agreed to give a full confession but has not done so. Clyde sarcastically applauds the judge, asking if she would release a murderer simply because he sweet-talked her. The judge is taken aback by Clyde's outburst, and as he continues to berate her for her naivety, bail is denied. Later in the interrogation room, Clyde describes the gruesome tape he sent Nick as a representation of good triumphing over evil. He admits to being the person on the tape and promises one more confession in exchange for something. Nick, exhausted by Clyde's manipulations, demands to know what he wants. Clyde requests a 20-ounce medium-rare steak and an iPod for his prison lunch. Before Nick leaves, Clyde offers information on the life of Bill Reynolds, Darby's lawyer, as his confession. Nick returns to find Sarah reporting that Bill has been missing for 3 days. Clyde speaks into the camera, addressing Nick directly. He tells Nick that if he wants Bill alive, he must meet his demands by 1 p.m. the next day. The following day, they have the steak delivered to the prison, but the warden double-checks the prosecutor's credentials, making them 8 minutes late. Clyde maintains his composure and reveals Bill's location, urging them to hurry. Nick rushes to a helicopter, and they fly to the scene while Clyde listens to his iPod and enjoys his steak with his cellmate, who had just threatened him. Clyde manages to befriend the cellmate, but it's all a ruse. He turns up the music to distract him while he stabs him in the neck with the T-bone from the steak. The guards discover the scene, and the warden is livid. Nick finds Bill buried with an oxygen mask, but he is already dead. The journey from the prison took them 15 minutes. If Clyde had received his lunch on time, Bill would still be alive. Nick is informed that Clyde murdered his cellmate, and the warden has moved him to solitary confinement. Nick visits Clyde in solitary, questioning the purpose of killing so many people. Clyde is determined to hold everyone accountable for their actions. Nick hands Clyde his daughter's bracelet and asks if his family would be proud of his vengeful actions. Clyde coldly reminds Nick that his wife and daughter are dead and cannot feel anything. Nick and Jonas meet with a government official who shares more information about Clyde. The official explains that Clyde is a skilled tactician who can kill people without being in the same room with them. He advises them to consider every move carefully, as Clyde likely wanted to be in prison. The only way to stop Clyde is to enter his cell and shoot him. Otherwise, everyone involved in his family's case will be targeted. As the official leaves, he ominously warns, "If Clyde wants you dead, you're dead." Armed with this information, Nick and Jonas ask the judge to violate Clyde's civil rights and restrict visitation for everyone's safety. She agrees and signs the necessary document. Just as she does so, her cell phone rings. When she answers, it explodes, killing her. Both Nick and Jonas are left in shock. Nick confronts Clyde in an interrogation room at the prison, demanding to know about any accomplices and the ultimate goal of his revenge. Clyde becomes angry because Nick still fails to grasp the true meaning behind his actions. He insists that if he had simply wanted revenge, he could have taken it against Darby's family over the past decade. Clyde offers Nick a final ultimatum: release him by 6 a.m. or everyone will die. Clyde is escorted to a maximum security solitary confinement cell by several guards. Meanwhile, Nick and Sarah meet at the prison and pore over documents, searching for clues about who might be aiding Clyde from the outside. Despite their efforts, they find nothing. Sarah begins to question if their decision to make a deal with Darby was the right choice. Nick reassures her that it was. The district attorney's office staff stays until 6 a.m., after which Nick sends everyone home to rest. Tragically, bombs attached to their cars explode as they leave, killing everyone, including Sarah. Knowing Clyde is still imprisoned, Nick is certain that someone is helping him. 6 officers have been killed in total. Nick and Jonas meet with the mayor, who struggles to comprehend how one incarcerated man could cause so much destruction. The mayor assigns 2 security guards to their protection. Nick sends his family to a safe location, instructing them to avoid using credit cards or cell phones to prevent their whereabouts from being discovered. Upon returning inside, he notices a framed newspaper article has been moved, indicating that someone has been in his house. Back at the prison, Clyde is taken out for a walk and encounters Nick and a detective. In a fit of rage, Nick assaults Clyde, who merely comments that it's good for him to be angry, as he's just getting started. The detective draws his gun, but Nick stops him. Clyde cryptically warns that what Nick is about to witness will be biblical. At Sarah's funeral, Jonas ponders if they brought this upon themselves, but Nick still believes they did the right thing, although he is beginning to doubt himself. As they drive away, a man dressed in black is seen controlling a military drone armed with a machine gun, an EMP, and a rocket launcher. The stage is set for an even greater confrontation. The cars are disabled and come to a halt. Jonas' car is bombarded with anti-tank rounds, and to ensure his demise, the car is blown up. The mayor is incredulous that Nick allowed the situation to escalate so far. She considers firing him, but to minimize media scrutiny, she instead appoints him as the new district attorney. The mayor of Philadelphia issues an emergency order to lock down the entire city, restricting movement within the city limits. Nick receives an email from one of Sarah's contacts, containing information about real estate owned by Clyde. He compiles a list of all properties sold in Philadelphia over the past decade and compares the sale prices. Through this investigation, Nick discovers that Clyde owns a small garage situated near the prison. Accompanied by the detective, Nick inspects the garage. Inside, they uncover a hole in the floor that leads to a tunnel directly beneath the prison. Clyde had engineered entrances into every cell. His plan all along had been to kill his cellmate and exploit this secret access. The detective searches Clyde's cell, but it is empty. Disguised as a janitor, Clyde manages to slip past security and enter City Hall through a light security checkpoint. Nick and the detective learn that Clyde has surveillance cameras installed everywhere, including inside Nick's home. They find a quote from von Clausewitz about the center of gravity, which they deduce refers to City Hall. Clyde plants a napalm bomb intended to kill the mayor during an upcoming security meeting. Nick and the detective arrive shortly thereafter and proceed cautiously, hoping not to alert Clyde to their presence. On the 5th floor, just below the conference room, they discover Clyde's janitorial card. They find a suitcase that they suspect contains the bomb. A bomb squad technician examines the suitcase and reports that the bomb is activated by a cell phone signal and could detonate at any moment. Agents monitoring Clyde's warehouse observe him arriving and inform Nick. Clyde retrieves his equipment from the tunnel and watches the security meeting commence. He grabs his cell phone and climbs back to his cell. Inside the cell, Clyde is surprised by Nick, who is armed and urges Clyde to make the right choice, offering him a way out. Clyde questions if Nick is proposing one final deal. Nick replies that he has finally understood Clyde's message. "I do not make deals with murderers." Nick urges Clyde to reconsider, stating that this decision will haunt him for the rest of his life. Clyde apologizes and dials the number. As Nick leaves, he clarifies that by the rest of his life, he meant approximately 25 seconds. The detective locks Clyde's tunnel door. Unbeknownst to Clyde, Nick has placed the suitcase with the bomb under his bed. Clyde gazes at his daughter's bracelet one last time before his cell is engulfed in flames and explodes. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay on top of all the latest recaps and never miss a beat. Thank you for watching.